From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. President Biden turned 80 years old on Sunday, and while we're talking about the age issue, let's discuss this. And it seems like the White House did not have a big birthday celebration for him. It seems like they have tried to ignore the questions about his age, and now we're 2 years into his term. The statement that I think people go back to on this is the one made by Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre over the summer. And she was asked about Biden's age and essentially said this isn't a story. She said, quote, "I can't even keep up with him," unquote. And she said it very enthusiastically. But Monet, aside from the public gaffes that the president is making, for example, recently he said he wanted to thank the prime minister for Colombia's leadership when he was on a visit to Cambodia. Aside from those things, there are also some leaks in the press now about aides that are protecting President Biden's weekends, who are worried that he might trip. He shuffles a bit when he walks. They're worried he might trip on a cord or something as he's going out for a speaking event. And it does raise the question of at what point, I mean, I get that modern medicine is a miracle and 80 is not what it used to be, but at what point do voters really want to have somebody younger going out and having these one-on-one meetings with Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think the honest answer to the question of how much Biden's age is going to affect voters' perception of him is that the midterm election result probably blunted a lot of that criticism in the same way that the midterm result really dragged Trump down with his candidates underperforming. I think the fact that Democrats kind of overperformed the expectation was a shot in the arm, so to speak, for Biden, and will make it so that a lot fewer people than before are going to say this man is not fit to run again. And you saw Biden react with a lot of confidence after the midterm elections when he was asked, what, if anything, are you going to change about your administration? He said, I'm going to change absolutely nothing. And that was clearly him taking the results as a referendum on his fitness and his performance as president. So I do think you're going to see him likely say, I'm going to be the best person to mount the party's campaign in 2024. All these people are using age merely as sort of an excuse to criticize me. Rivals are trying to find a way to squeak in and push me aside, but I think that he's fully confident. And frankly, those sorts of personal critiques are something that really only gains strength when voters have the perception that the president is underperforming. You saw in the Obama administration after the 2010 midterm shellacking, that's when you have the Times coming out and saying maybe he's too aloof, he's not forming relationships with other Democrats, things like that. But as long as he's performing well and as long as he has coattails, supporters within your own party usually are willing to brush aside whatever personal critiques they might have of the party's leader. And so now that he seems to have done a competent job of leading the Democratic Party, I think that the concerns about his age are going to fall by the wayside by a bit.
But if true, it seems like Democrats may be making a mistake. And I'll point to a recent Reuters poll. 68% of people say that Mr. Biden might not be up to another term. 86% say that there should be a presidential cutoff of age 75 or younger. And the other part that plays into the dynamic on the Democratic side, Colin, is that there is no obvious popular successor on the Democratic side. If he bows out, number two is Kamala Harris. But if you look at the polling figures, her approval rating is 39.5% in the 538 average. That is lower than Joe Biden's 41.4. It is also lower than President Trump's. And so, Colin, this is sort of a problem that Biden has made himself by picking Kamala Harris as vice president. And she would say, I'm sure her allies would say, not helping her to become more popular, not giving her an issue portfolio that would put her front and center on popular things. Leaving aside whether that's true or not, it does seem like that is part of what President Biden and what might be weighing on his mind is if I bow out, then who is here to come in and beat President Trump, who we already know has announced he's running?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, don't forget that President Biden, he said back in 2020 that he just saw himself as a bridge. He acknowledged in his first run for president that he really saw himself as someone who was just going to sort of shift things over and be there to bring in the new generation. And yeah, she was supposed to be the new generation. And guess what? She doesn't really have the support of her own party. You had in July, you were mentioning some of the other polls. In July, there was a New York Times Siena College poll that showed that 64% of Democrats, they said they'd rather have a new candidate in the upcoming campaign. And that's a huge amount. And if she can't be the sort of natural successor, then you end up in a very raucous primary, but one that's a bit different than you're seeing for the GOP because a bit less expected.
But that would make it fun, I guess, for people who like watching politics, journalists, if you had raucous primaries on both sides of the aisle. And it could be one of those elections that turns into a generational shift. So 1960, I would point to John F. Kennedy was elected. He was the first president born in the 20th century. And then also 1992, that's when the baby boom generation really took the baton, and we didn't have any more presidents who lived through the Great Depression, who lived through World War II. And so maybe it is Generation X's turn. What do you think about that, Monet?
Yeah, I certainly think that if, for example, Ron DeSantis is able to defeat Trump in a primary and get the nomination, the contrast between him at age 44 and very energetic against President Biden would not be very optimistic for the Democrats in terms of how that would look and how independent voters who do worry about Biden's age would be likely to shake out. I think you can go through history and look at some of the matchups that pitted a younger candidate against an older one. For example, Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush in 1992, or even Barack Obama against John McCain in 2008. And I do think that age was probably a factor in all of those contests. People tend to want to see a younger, more vigorous candidate be elected. It's not necessarily their first voting priority, but it's something that they allow to be the difference maker if they're on the fence. And because we've had such tight presidential elections in years past, I think Democrats should really worry about the possibility of a contrast like that. So for now, I do think that they are willing to rally around Biden if he decides to run again, but I think that there's still a lot of them hoping that he will willingly stand aside and have the chance for a younger candidate to potentially step into that slot.
Thank you, Monet. Thank you, Colin. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we will be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.